Hello everybody, this is Dr. Reyes-Fournier, and I am so sorry. The last video was only 2 seconds long and obviously didn't tell you how to get to the DSM. So let me do this again the right way. Okay, so from your main page like this, okay, oops, you go to My Studies, and under My Studies, Library. There are different ways to get to the library. I'm just showing you the easy way that I go to. Here you are at the Purdue Global Online Library. On the right-hand toolbar, like I told you on Thursday night, click on eBooks. Scroll down a teeny bit where it says All eBook Databases. The second one down is DSM-5 Library. When that opens up, you have the whole DSM-5 library. What does that mean, Dr. Reyes-Fournier? Let me tell you what it means. It means that you have the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Bible, and you also have the Differential Diagnosis Handbook. You have the Clinical Cases Handbook, which I recommend wholeheartedly, and we'll talk about in a couple seconds. Now, here's the DSM-5. How are you going to use it? Hit the table of contents. It's the easiest way to go. DSM-5 Task Force explains to you how they come about with diagnosis and symptoms and things like that. The classification, same thing. You're going to go to section 2, which is the diagnostic criteria and codes, and that'll show you all of the diagnoses. Well, these are the umbrella terms, or what you would call like the categories. So neurodevelopmental disorders are all of the cognitive disorders, things like childhood congenital disorders, TBIs, Alzheimer's, dementia, anything having to do with brain and brain injury or childhood brain-centered issues are going to be found in neurodevelopmental disorders. Schizophrenia spectrum category has all the psychotic disorders. Bipolar and related disorders, of course, has everything bipolar. Depressive disorders. Now you wonder, why wasn't this part of depression? Well, this was actually parceled out of depression, so now it's its own category. Bipolar, its own category, sandwiched in between schizophrenia. So it makes more sense because bipolar in the manic phase resembles more of a schizophrenia than it does a depression. Okay, so it's kind of sandwiched in here. Depressive disorders has all the depressions in it. Anxiety, same thing. And you go all the way down. For us, as substance abuse professionals, we were going to click on here, substance-related and addictive disorders. Remember I mentioned there's only one addiction? Okay, so note, these are all of the diagnoses in this area, which is a lot. You see that? Actually, it's probably one of the largest categories. You'll find like the bipolar one is not even an eighth of this. It's kind of small. So note, do you see the word addiction anywhere? I think you're only going to find it here. They're going to talk about gambling disorder. They're going to mention the word addiction and gambling disorder. Okay? But that's pretty much it. But note that they call it addictive disorders, but you're not going to see the word addiction. That's pretty much it. But here you see that they have categories. You have your alcohol use disorders, alcohol intoxication, alcohol withdrawal. These kinds of diagnoses like alcohol intoxication, alcohol withdrawal, these are only like diagnosed in hospital settings. We would rarely ever get to diagnose this because this is when somebody's drunk and this is when somebody's experiencing withdrawal symptoms from alcohol. And the same thing pretty much for any of the other use disorders. We don't usually do the intoxication or withdrawal diagnosis. Those are pretty much reserved for emergency room doctors to diagnose. Okay, so let's look at alcohol use disorder so that we can see how to diagnose. Now, let's say you get a client in there, they got a DUI, and you're doing your initial interview. You want to see if this individual has an alcohol use disorder. Now, when you look at the diagnosis, you're going to see that it'll always start with A. A is going to tell you how many symptoms that they need to have to meet criteria, and it's going to tell you a time period that this had to occur in. Okay, so for example, let's say that you have 2 symptoms, but they occurred 24 years ago. Then that doesn't count, obviously, because it has to occur within the last 12 months. The reason being is that in most cases, we could probably cobble together a whole diagnosis if you give me your whole lifetime. But if it's, truncated time, like 12 months, or like for depression, you're going to see like 2 weeks or a month, it's all these symptoms have to be present during that time. Okay, so you've got 2 symptoms that to meet the lowest threshold of this diagnosis. What does that mean? Well, in all use disorders, we also have what is called, and I'm just going to scroll down here. We have what is called, hello, where's my little block? There you go. You have what are called the severity index. Okay, so mild alcohol use disorder means that you have a presence of 2 or 3 symptoms. Moderate, 4 or 5 symptoms. Severe is 6 or more symptoms. So to meet criteria for alcohol use disorder, it's very simple. If, for example, they're already coming on with a DUI, that's 1 symptom right there. Why? Because you will see that here we go. It's probably one of these over here. Nope. Here we go. Continued alcohol use despite having persistent or recurrent social or interpersonal problems caused or exacerbated by alcohol. That's not it. But it's one of these here where basically if you get in trouble because of it. Recurrent alcohol use resulting in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or at home. If you got a DUI, then you probably couldn't go to work or school or home. And you probably have other issues. Okay? So you just need to be specific. You ask the questions around these areas. If the individual suffered from a hangover, that's withdrawal. A withdrawal symptom from alcohol is a hangover. Simple as that. If they've done anything to, for example, like if they were, hair of the dog kind of thing where they like had to drink alcohol the next day so that they could feel okay, that's also considered a symptom. Alcohol is taken in larger amounts or over a larger period than was intended. That's pretty much everybody who has a use disorder. They didn't stop when they wanted to stop. If they tried cutting down at all, that's a symptom. In fact, you'd be really hard-pressed not to be able to diagnose your average college student as having a mild alcohol use disorder. If they've had a hangover from having too much partying, if they've noticed that it used to take them about 3 beers to get drunk and now it takes them a 6-pack, that's tolerance and withdrawal. That's a use disorder. Okay? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they belong in treatment. That means that they should probably look at what they're doing. Okay? So, when you diagnose, you're going to be saying alcohol use disorder, mild, and you will also be including this whole written section, 305.00, parentheses F10.10, parentheses mild. Why? Because these are the diagnostic codes. These codes match the ICD-10, which is the World Health Organization's way of unifying and standardizing all medical billing. So these numbers also match to alcohol use disorders in Europe. Okay? And that's, the idea is to standardize, to make everything easier. And so anyway, you do the severity index, you make sure that you mention everything. And when you write it up, you say, Jesse presents with a mild alcohol use disorder. You put the numbers as evidenced by the fact that he reports drinking more than he wants to, and also trying to cut down for several months and he hasn't been able to, and there you go. that you've justified your diagnosis. Do not just say Jesse has an alcohol use disorder. Why? Because then I can argue with you that you are wrong. When we justify what we do, it's a lot harder to argue with somebody. Another reason why we do that is that it shows that you actually took the time to match the symptoms, the behaviors that are manifested, or the behaviors that are reported to the actual criteria of the diagnosis. That you're showing that you've seen both and you can match them both, and you've justified it. It's the same way that we cite things in our papers. Showing expertise is justifying what we're saying. Okay? We always justify, we just don't leave it there. That's science. That's what we do. Okay, so let's say that Jesse also presents, let's go back. Jesse also presents with some weird other things, that maybe, he seems kind of sad, maybe a little bit empty, and you're thinking maybe he's depressed. So you go to the depression. Notice how small it is compared to the substance use ones. And you look at major depression. See how quickly this opens up. This is why I like using the online version. In major depressive disorder, here's your A. It tells you need 5 or more symptoms. And one of those has to be either depressed mood or a loss of interest or pleasure. And let's say that you see that Jesse shows and talks about a depressed mood nearly every day for a couple of weeks, and doesn't have much interest in anything, doesn't want to do anything. Okay, that's 2 symptoms, but you still need 3 more symptoms. During an initial interview, you might not catch all 5 symptoms. So what you can do is say things like rule out, R-U-L-E, R-U-L-E, out, O-U-T, major depressive disorder. And say that Jesse is presenting with 2 of the symptoms, and maybe further investigation and analysis and assessment might reveal more symptoms. Okay? But you do it the same way. You justify everything. You match their behavior with the symptoms and justify everything. And in terms of the coding, here they also have a severity index, as you can see, and here's the coding for single episode, recurrent episode, and all that. And then you could also do things like it shows that he has some anxiety or melancholic features and things like that. And just read it all out. Now, cool part about having the DSM library is, let's say you don't know what you're doing, okay? You really don't know and you want to learn more. Go to the DSM clinical cases, click on those, and they have written out for you casework and cases where they discuss a case and they diagnose it for you. Okay? And for those of you who feel uncomfortable, this is really one of the best ways of learning it. Plus, the cases are interesting, and some of them might resemble some of the cases that you're going to see in this class. So you might want to get familiar with those. Okay, I think we did it now. If you have any questions, email me. We're going to get through this together. Don't worry about it. Don't freak out about it. We got this. All right? Okay, we'll talk soon.